Last quarter, I read a lot of books, but there were only a handful that I would recommend you to read. So, in this video, I'm going to be telling you about them, my favourite books from the last quarter, which includes the month of July, August, and September. Yes, I am aware that we are almost in November, but better late than never. All the books I have included here, I have rated 4 stars and above, and I'm going to be listing them in order of preference. So, stick around to the end of the video to find out which were the only 2 books last quarter that I gave 5 stars to. And if you're new here, welcome. Hi, I'm Katerina. I make videos chatting about books, and if that's your thing, why not subscribe? Okay, so starting off, the first favorite book I read from the last quarter was Come Rain or Come Shine by kazuo ishiguro. So this is technically a novella. It is super short, it's less than 100 pages, and the story follows a man in his late 40s who has never really reached his full potential in life. He's one day invited to stay with old university friends who were a couple whilst they were studying but are now married. But whilst he's there, he essentially gets roped into the drama of this couple's strained relationship, where his guy mate essentially asks him to convince his wife to stay with him. And I rated this book 4 stars because overall, this story really wasn't what I was expecting. If you've read previous works from this author, you'll be accustomed to his usual writing style in that it's quite somber in its dialogue and slow in its prose, and overall just being slightly existential whilst being quite outside the box. Such works like Never Let Me Go and Klara and the Sun, if you know, you know. But don't expect similar content from those books in this one. This one has a very different tone to it. And I totally didn't expect this. It was honestly really weird to the point where it was kind of ridiculous, but in a way that was kind of funny and entertaining. I've said this before, and perhaps this is a niche reference that only my British viewers will get, but the two men here very much felt like Mark and Jeremy from Peep Show. This book just felt like an episode that was set 20 years in the future. The whole situation here is just absurd and pathetic, but in a way that was surprisingly kind of funny. It had this very dry sense of humour that felt very bizarre but surreal at the same time. But I like the fact it still had traces of the author's signature writing style of exploring themes in the human condition, particularly exploring nostalgia and the quiet disappointments that we experience in adulthood that can lead to unrealized potential and also loneliness. And how, as much as you may try and ignore it and maybe denial of it, other people will implicitly bring it up to you in some way or the other where you eventually have to face it, which is something I'm seeing the older I get, and I surprisingly related to this, which is something me and my friends talk about so much, which is wild because none of us are even 30 yet, but I think just having access to the internet now, you can see the achievements of so many others in life, and you begin to feel very out of touch and very just out the loop with everything the older you get. So yeah, I very much enjoyed this, and I think you would too, and especially for something less than 100 pages, I definitely think it's worth your time. The next book in my list here is slightly longer, but I still would definitely say this is worth your time. And I will leave the cover of this book here because YouTube does not like it when I say this certain word. So the title of this book is The Virgin by Jeffrey Eugenides. This story is set in 1970s suburban Michigan, and it's told through the collective perspective of these teenage boys who are obsessed with these 5 beautiful sisters that live in their neighborhood. These girls are all very stunning, yet they're all kind of depressing and have this mysterious allure to them that the boys are just very much entranced by. They're just fascinated by these girls, and this novel is essentially them recounting these girls' lives and trying to piece together the memories and clues that led up to the circumstances and why they ended themselves. And I know that sounds like a depressing book, but I gave this 4 stars. Maybe it's the inner Tumblr girly in me that likes sad things, but hear me out. I heard a lot of feedback saying that they found this book quite harmful in the way that it romanticized trauma, and it was really gross for the author to sexualize the girls in this way. But I think anyone voicing these opinions is kind of missing the point of the whole book. It's written from the perspective of these boys, which in my opinion shows the messaging of the story to be the dangers of the male gaze and the consequences this has on girls. It's so clear that these girls were under the control of quite abusive parents, but the boys just completely looked past this. Instead, they just blindly idolized these girls and fantasized about being with them. It shows the dangers of lust over love, as they claim that they loved these girls but did nothing to help them. Because it's wild how, despite this novel literally being about the girls, they're still somehow decentered in their own story because it mainly focuses on what these guys think of them. The novel also just had such a smooth prose and was just incredibly well written. Like, you can tell that the author crafted each sentence so carefully. It kind of felt weirdly whimsical despite the heavy themes explored, and honestly read more like poetry at certain points than it did a novel. It had this overall very haunting and hazy and dreamlike feel to it, which honestly made it very captivating. I was also very much impressed by the use of this first person plural narrative. I think it was extremely well done. To constantly be writing we instead of I throughout the whole novel and still make it very natural and not jarring for the reader to read, I think is honestly remarkable. And despite the heaviness of this book overall, I really enjoyed it. I'd recommend that you read the trigger warnings before picking this up if you are quite sensitive to certain harmful subjects, but I would say if you want to read this, read it now because I think autumn is the perfect time of year to read this. For my next book, I would honestly say that you could read this any time of year, and that's Orbital by Samantha Harvey. The story here follows 6 astronauts over a 24-hour period on board the International Space Station. Of these, we have 2 women that are Japanese and British, and we have 4 men who are 1 American, 1 Italian, and 2 Russian. And over the course of a whole day, we are with them as they complete 16 rotations of the Earth. However, whilst it's not a complicated story because not really much happens in terms of plot, it's a very deep novel because it's quite philosophical, because we delve into themes such as human connection, environmental issues, as well as admiring the Earth's inherent beauty. And I also gave this 4 stars because I genuinely thought that this was a stellar read. I already had high expectations going into this book because I like space, and how can I dislike a book about space when it's literally set in space and about space? Take a shot every time I say space and you will be blackout by the end of this video. But this book surprised me because it wasn't just about space, but it was actually about the Earth itself. There's no real plot here or big character arcs or huge developments or anything like that. The whole book literally just feels like a love letter for our planet and how we need to take care of our only home. I also quite rated the fact that we have different nationalities on board this spaceship because it feels like in a time like today where there are so many world conflicts and disagreements, it was really refreshing to read on something that we actually all agree on, which is that we need to look after our Earth better because she really is our one and only home. Despite what billionaires promise you and the fact that we can go and travel and inhabit other planets, nothing is going to compare to the planet we're on. This is where we belong. Also, unless you are literally a billionaire, there is no way you're going to be leaving this planet, so let's make sure we take care of it. It was also really interesting to read how these astronauts also had to leave the Earth in order to have this newfound appreciation for it, because it is so easy to forget what this planet provides for us when we are so up close in the details of it and we can't see the full picture. I think if you love nature and humans' inherent connection to it, you will also love this book. Plus, it's super short. You can literally read it in one sitting, which is what I did. And my next book is also super short, which you can read in one sitting, and that's Chess Story by Stefan Zweig. This story is set on board a cruise ship that's on its way to Buenos Aires, and on board we have an international chess prodigy. This obviously stirs the interest of the other passengers on board, and they challenge him to play chess with them as a group. And amongst these passengers, there is a mysterious man that happens to have extraordinary chess skills, but we learn his complicated backstory and why he's so consumed by the game. This novel is heavy in themes of obsession, isolation, and the capacity of the human mind. And I rated this book 4.5 stars. I not only quite like chess, but I overall just really enjoyed the story. Because in my opinion, this was a really solid novella. Like, it ticked a lot of boxes for me. It was well written, it was moving, it had the perfect amount of characters. It also gave you enough detail that was relevant to the story to get to know the main characters, but also got into the plot of the book immediately, so you weren't bored waiting for things to happen. And also, don't worry if you don't know how to play chess if you want to read this. I thought it was going to go more into the technicalities of the game and certain moves, but it didn't. It does talk about certain strategies that will probably give you an extra layer of context if you know chess, but it won't be an unenjoyable or confusing read if you don't, in my opinion anyway, and that's from someone who knows chess kind of well. Because this book isn't just about chess as the game, it's so much more. It explores the human mind, its abilities and its limits, and how addiction can lead to madness. It also touched upon elements of history, in particular certain politics of what was going on during this time era. And for me, this book just turned out to have a lot of elements that I enjoyed. It also really made me want to read the author's other very popular book called Post Office Girl. I've seen this book around, but since reading Chess Story and really admiring how this author writes, it's made me want to pick up this book. And another book I picked up last quarter that I was really glad I did was The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. This book centers around a divorced Italian middle-aged lady, and we follow her over the span of a couple of weeks as she summers alone on the coast in southern Italy. And at the resort she's in, she essentially becomes low-key obsessed with this quite boisterous and intimidating Neapolitan family nearby, and she particularly takes interest in a young mother and daughter in this family, which consequently triggers her own gritty and complicated feelings and reflections on motherhood and independence. And I gave this book 4.5 stars, which is no surprise because Elena Ferrante is one of my favorite authors. I love this author's work mainly for the way she writes about women, at the same time critiquing the society they have to battle against. And this book was nothing short of that. We have a incredibly complex and layered woman who discusses notions of femininity and motherhood, all whilst harboring very bitter feelings about her roots and her birthplace, along with her regrets and resentments against certain people and choices in her life. And this novel particularly focuses on mummy issues, shall I say? Because we see this main character deal with conflicts of the independence of being a woman, but also the constraints of motherhood, but also reflecting on her struggles as a wife and a daughter and also a working woman. I very rarely see books that voice opinions on the side of not wanting children or even regret having them. And as someone who feels conflicted in perhaps maybe not wanting children, this made me feel very seen. Overall, this book just very much struck a chord with me that I didn't expect to. But at the same time, in typical Ferrante fashion, this book was enjoyable to read because the writing was very poetic but also slightly deranged. I just love this book so much. It was incredibly meditative at the same time as being very engaging in its plot and its commentary. And my next book that I also found very meditative and engaging was My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout. This is a fictional book that follows a woman called Lucy who actually is a writer, and she's hospitalized for an extended period of time after a routine surgery goes slightly wrong. But at the very start of the novel, her estranged mother unexpectedly visits her after years of no contact, and they spend several days together, and through various conversations we uncover the complexities of their relationship as well as her struggling and traumatic upbringing in Illinois. And in the process we witness how Lucy confronts her deep loneliness, her longing for love, and her difficulties in her mother and daughter dynamic. And like the before, I also rated this 4.5 stars, but unlike the before, I honestly didn't expect to. I've seen this book here and there, but I literally knew nothing about it. So when I stumbled across this book in a charity shop, I really had no expectations going in. But wow, my expectations were exceeded because I honestly adored this book. Nothing much happens in terms of plot. It's very introspective and psychological. It's kind of one of those books that you think more about after you finish reading it, because you then kind of think about what you would do if you'd been through the same things that the main character did. And this book really makes you think about the big things in life and also pondering certain questions and scenarios, such as, are we really ever able to escape our pasts, particularly our childhoods? And if you do experience a devastating childhood, are you ever able to really heal from that? For example, does moving different cities actually help you move on? And are some mother-daughter relationships doomed from the start? You know, is it your mother's fault that she was like this, or was it just because she was the product of her own upbringing? It's a story that's very quiet and meditative, but also incredibly brutal and raw at the same time. This was actually the only book in this whole list that I actually cried to whilst reading because it was just so astoundingly powerful in a way that I didn't expect. And no, I wasn't even on my time of the month when I was reading this. I just found it incredibly hard hitting. All the conversations just felt very real and like they would actually happen in real life, and I think that very much drew me into the novel. I just love complex and deep characters, especially women, and I think that this book was just unreal. So yeah, I would definitely recommend you read this. I probably would say to check the trigger warnings beforehand because you may also cry to this too. However, for my next book, this will probably also make you cry, but out of laughter rather than sadness, and that's The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This book is a completely different vibe. This is set in 2008 Ireland during the financial crisis, and we follow Rachel, who is this very chaotic and messy young adult, and we witness her essentially navigate the messiness of adulthood. And her life is heavily impacted by her gay best friend, who was once a co-worker, but now he lives with her and is also her bestie. And whilst trying to survive the financial crisis, they're also just trying to figure out life together. And the plot mainly revolves around a secret affair with her professor who is married. And I also gave this book 4.5 stars because this was genuinely excellent. This is one of the funniest books, if not the funniest book I've read so far this year. I don't know if it intended to be a comedy, but it just had so many phenomenal one-liners that I would be literally laughing out loud reading this. The main character is also a student who works in a bookshop, so there was a lot of witty comments and remarks about other books and authors here, which is great if you're a reader because you'll definitely catch these, and I think it will make you laugh because it definitely gave me a bit of a giggle. Even if you're not a reader, I think the plot overall is genuinely very entertaining. It just very perfectly captured that chaotic messiness that comes in your early 20s that was tragic at the time, but you look back on it and you're like, what the hell? It actually reminded me of Fleabag, the TV show. It's just a hot and funny mess. I don't usually read books that are marketed as comedies, and I think that's why I ended up picking this book up because I didn't expect it to, and it was genuinely nice to read something lighthearted because if you know me, I tend to read things on the heavier side. And I've also heard that they're going to be making this into a TV show, which I think I will be watching. But yeah, it just had a lot of things I liked, such as the Irish, messy characters, and 2010s nostalgia. I would also definitely recommend this if you want to get out of a reading slump or if you just want something to perk your mood up slightly, because this was genuinely an overall great read. And finally, these last two books I'm going to be talking about are my two 5-star reads from the last quarter. And first of these two books is Notes on a Scandal by Zoe Heller. So this story is actually based in North London, and we follow a secondary school and the teachers that work there. Specifically, our main character is an elderly history teacher, and she befriends the school's new art teacher. However, she finds out that this new teacher is actually having a secret affair with one of her underage students. And we basically witness the drama and chaos that follows this discovery. I would say that this is more of a psychological novel because it very much delves into the complexities of human relationships as well as the boundaries of trust. And we also have quite a deep dive into power dynamics and manipulation, along with the price of secrecy and the nature of friendship. And this 5-star was just a no-brainer for me. It had all the elements of a perfect book. It was honestly phenomenal. I was genuinely speechless after finishing it. Firstly, the writing is flawless. I would have moments after reading certain sections where I was like, damn, Zoe Heller, you know how to write. Even the slower moments where if you tried to describe the plot to someone would sound really boring, but reading it was just so fascinating and captivating to read. Secondly, the plot here and the character motivations is unlike anything I've ever read. We follow this character who, on the outside, is someone who society would typically disregard. It's this middle-aged spinster that no one seems to take seriously, and no one even looks at her in old age, and you can just tell that she's so riddled with jealousy and manipulation. But at the same time, you feel sorry for her because you can tell that she's suffering from a very bone-deep loneliness. If you've experienced a certain type of loneliness, you'll weirdly find yourself relating to this main character. And even aside from her, all the other characters are written so well and fleshed out so realistically that you end up relating to different ones depending on different dynamics that are happening. Another thing I loved about the story is that it very much touched upon certain topics that gave a lot of more weight to the plot itself, such as class differences and gender differences and power dynamics and repressed desires. All very important topics, and it was just blended so seamlessly into the plot of the story. It was just overall a very stunning read, and I was genuinely floored by this. And finally, my last book in this video, which I think was probably my favourite from the last quarter, but this was very neck and neck with my previous book, and that's Julia Fox's memoir, Down the Drain. So this story is told by Julia Fox as she essentially recounts her life. From her wild childhood in Italy to the years that she was growing up in New York City, she literally tells us everything. She gives us the very unfiltered and messy story of going through poverty, addiction, and fame and motherhood, including some absolutely banana stories of her going missing and becoming a sex worker and dating Kanye West. We literally see it all, including how she managed to survive abuse and heartbreak and the pressures of being a celeb. And I rated this 5 stars because this was probably the most mental book that I have ever read. This was a book I found physically hard to put down, and when I did put it down, it was basically all I could think about because I was just aghast at all the things that this woman went through in her life. Like, you think you just read one thing that was absolutely wild, and then the next chapter will have something even wilder, and the book just continues like that until the end. Like, sometimes I'd be reading something she went through and I'd be like, this would be insane for an adult to go through this, yet she's going through this at like 12 years old. She also anonymizes all the names, so you can't really figure out who is who, but between chapters, I was so invested in this book that I would go on the internet just to find out more of the things that she went through and who perhaps this person was, because I just thought it was all so unbelievable. I was even texting my friends who probably don't really care about Julia Fox about things that were happening in this book because I just had to share these stories with someone. And it's not even the fact that her life was so scandalous and wild, which is what made this book so good, even though it does heavily contribute towards it. But it's also so admirable to see this woman's resilience and determinations in her life, despite the incredible hardships that she's endured. And despite how the internet and the media have painted her image, she has reclaimed her own narrative. And I think with someone like Julia Fox, who is essentially, I believe, a model now, people can assume that she has low intelligence, but this book was written so incredibly that I was really floored by her. And I was like, damn, girl, you can write a book. I just love an intelligent woman who is very unapologetically herself. And honestly, I very much admired the vulnerability that she showed when she was writing this because it was incredibly inspiring. I absolutely loved this. I had a blast reading it from start to finish, and I would recommend this to anyone, even if you don't really know who Julia Fox is. I didn't. Yeah, I had so much fun reading this. And there you have it. Those are my favourite books from the last quarter. What were your favourite books from the past 3 months? Let me know in the comments below. I'd like to read them this quarter for me to finish the end of the year. So if you have any good shouts, let me know. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like down below. It really helps my channel out. And if you're new here, why not subscribe? I make videos all things chatting about books. Feel free to also follow me on my socials. I have a Goodreads where I update in real time when I'm reading. And I also have an Instagram where I do post on personal stuff, but I also post the books I've read, letting you know what they're about and what I rate them out of 10. And thanks for being here. I really enjoyed making this video. It's always nice to talk really positively about books because not all the books I read are great. So it's nice to just chat happily about books that I really, really loved. Once again, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!